innovation in community policing. That's a really very nice award, and it's not the first time we've gotten awards like that. And the second person to mention in our police department is Lieutenant Matthew Johnson. He's the commander of UMB Police and Public Safety Community Outreach. So we have a major arm in our police department for community outreach. And he's one of the inaugural group of 12 who received the Baltimore Banner's new Emerging Leader Award. And I got to think, Dawn, that that's unique to have a police officer as an emerging leader. And we should take a lot of pride in that, because that says our police force is in touch with reality. So that's a good thing. I want to ask you to do something on your calendars. You all remember Convocation. Convocation occurs September, and the exact date is the 14th. It will be in the tent again on the Kester's lot. All faculty invited, staff are invited, and if students want to come, they're invited. There will be food afterwards, if that's the most important part to you. But we have 3 very energetic speakers lined up for this. I won't tell you who they are. I'll keep it a secret. Okay. It's not a secret. Oh, is it? Well, I'll still keep it secret. And there will be 7 distinguished university professors, or 8? 8 distinguished university professors. So please come out. This is an opportunity to begin the new academic year and to recognize some very accomplished individuals, both the university professors as well as the speakers for our convocation. So there's that one. Now, one topic that I think is really important to just mention is, it's really getting tough to walk around this campus, isn't it? The sidewalks are closed, there's holes in the road, there's barricades, there's all kinds of things, and it's a little frustrating. So what I asked for was to be able to tell you the various things going on, because I think you need to know that the good part is we're not here fixing things that are broken. The good part here is we're adding a lot of amenities and duplication and excellence to the campus. So let me read a couple of them. The one that you've seen with holes all over the campus is the campus-wide electrical distribution project. And some of you may know that up on Saratoga building, there was a new building built that had new electrical switching. A few of you might have been around Thanksgiving. How many years ago? 6 or 7 years ago. We lost electrical power for 3 days. I don't mind telling you, in a research institution, that's a major ordeal. And so the legislature was good enough to give us almost $90 million. Does that sound right? To build this duplicative electrical infrastructure, redundancy. So the fact that we're digging up everything is to lay down these new cables so that if the power fails in one site, we've got a redundant site. And the initial power site for us, if you go in front of the medical center, there's a road that goes down into nothingness, and below there, another grade down, meaning near the water table, was the whole infrastructure for our university. And guess what? It failed that Thanksgiving. And so this now gives us a redundant service, which is really important. There's also a renovation to Howard Hall, the entrance renovation. There's also the dental school's got us here, a new chilled loop, water loop extension in the dental school so that they continue to have a functional water system there, air conditioning. And then some of you may have noticed that there's an area fenced off at the front of the hospital, and the entrance to the hospital is no longer available. And so it's I'm forgetting the dollar amount for that. Anybody remember the dollar amount for that construction? It's several hundred million dollars to build a new advanced medicine cancer center there, plus on top a rehab facility. So that'll really improve the capacity of the medical center. It'll strengthen our cancer services and other services. So that's a really big step forward. And that's occurring You guys remember COVID just happened? It's occurring in spite of the fact that there was a huge amount of financial burden and everything on the health system in this state. So it's remarkable that's occurring, and it's progress. It's also very inconvenient, isn't it? Last thing, we have the Middle States reaccreditation site visit coming up, and I see Dean Reynolds and Provost Ward here. Do you want to make any comments about that, please? Mark?
We are making progress. The working groups are assigned and will continue to meet through the year.
So this is an every 8-year reaccreditation. We think we're in good shape, but we also think good preparation for the site visits is very important. And so we're in the self-study phase, and I'm pleased that the two of them are leading that. Thank you. We lose sight of Middle States and its importance because you all live in a school, and each school has its own accreditation, but this is for the whole campus. So you got to have the whole campus accredited to have the schools accredited. So lastly, affirmative action and the Supreme Court decision. So we have two guests with us this afternoon who are going to talk a little bit about that. And then between the three of us, we'll answer any questions that come up. So I would like to introduce two individuals. One is Dr. Diane Forbes Berthoud, who is our Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Am I close? Who's been here now 2 years, and who has been very focused on, are we prepared for this? What are we doing? And as well as not to undermine our previous efforts in this very important area. And the other is Professor Mark Graber, who's Professor of Law. He can tell you his expertise better than I, but it's constitutional law, right, Mark?
Good enough.
One unique thing about Professor Graber that you should know is that this campus has one University System of Maryland Regents professor, and he happens to be it. And it was a happy day when we got that from the Regents 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So he's he's unique anyhow, but that makes him especially unique. So maybe if I could ask Professor Graber to start off with, tell us a little bit about this decision, if you can, what you know about it. And it's only 4 hours old, right? Okay, it's only 4 hours old. And then after that, get Dr. Forbes Berthoud to talk about some of our preparations and how this does or does not change what we've been doing. So Professor Graber.
Well, first, thank you very, very much. I should note that legal decisions are often opaque to non-lawyers. So when I'm married to a doctor and I try to explain this, it's just, why don't they talk about that? I said, they don't. Yeah. Why are they talking about that? Because that's what they feel they have to talk about. So what we have to understand is what the Chief Justice felt he had to talk about and what he ignored. And I suspect it's different from what a great many of you feel you might want to talk about, but this is the language of the law. According to Supreme Court precedent, you may use race only when you're pursuing a compelling interest and your use of race is necessary to pursue that compelling interest. And in the educational system, according to past precedent, the only legitimate use of race is diversity, not to ameliorate past societal disadvantage. So Robert simply says, with respect to past societal disadvantage, we decided that 15, 20 years ago. Not going to talk about it. I'm simply going to talk about diversity independent of past disadvantage. And he says three things. Number one, let's look at compelling. What are the advantages of diversity? Are they measurable? He says, well, producing better leaders. That's a little squishy. Not very measurable. Harvard and the University of North Carolina have really failed to explain some end that is measurable, that we can say, yes, you're achieving this, and this is really compelling. Second, how does diversity, again, diversity independent of social disadvantage, how does this achieve these ends? Again, Harvard and North Carolina are unsure. They've been practicing this for about 50 years. Have they made progress? Have they measured it? They haven't told us. So we don't appear to have a necessary means. Third, a previous case called Grutter versus Bollinger said, by the way, we hope in 2003, we won't have to practice affirmative action 25 years from now. The Chief Justice interprets this more as a mandate, that even if we don't have to get rid of affirmative action by 2028, all uses of race should have an endpoint. Harvard and North Carolina do not have an endpoint. Therefore, because they have failed to articulate a sufficient, compelling end, that the means are necessary, and it does not have an endpoint, the use of race is unconstitutional. Now, it's important to emphasize what Roberts doesn't say. In the last part of the opinion, he says, oh, by the way, but it's perfectly legitimate if someone says, here's how race has affected my life. You can do that. You simply can't give any credit whether the person who says this is African American, Hispanic, Asian, white, whatever. So what we do know, let's start off with, is there are a lot of forms that will have to be changed. We do know that you shouldn't have a meeting that says, you know, at our first run, we had, say, 15% African American students. Let's see what we can do to get it to 17. However, at least as this opinion is written, emphasis, as this opinion is written, it's not how next year's opinion might be written. You can use proxies for race. You can say, for example, the University of Maryland, Baltimore, we don't have a lot of students, or students have been historically underrepresented from these zip codes. You can do that. You can ask students to say things of how prejudice has affected your life. Whether that will suffice to hit certain goals, I don't know. Fortunately, to my right is a person who knows a whole lot more about that than I do. So I'll leave it to Diane.
Oh, Bruce disappeared. I was waiting for the follow-up question. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for your interest, your passion, your love for UMB, for higher education, and for access. I start with a quote today from the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, NADIHE. And as an association, we issued the following quote statement. Quote, the Supreme Court has erred grievously in overturning decades of precedent that has affirmed the legality and value of race-conscious admissions practices. Today's ruling presents yet another obstacle for students seeking equitable access to the opportunities that a college degree offers. And what are those? Higher earnings, lower rates of unemployment, academic, economic, social mobility. And we believe that this has created some barriers for more students to the dream of education, of freedom, of equity. We talked last week, for those of you who were able to attend, of all the benefits of diversity in academia, in medicine, in tech, and all the fields that we can think about, nursing and all the schools here. Improved critical thinking skills, enriched understanding, learning from different disciplines. Some of you know I was previously at University of California and COVID, talking with philosophers, biomedical researchers, community members, teachers, and how much we learned from people from all walks of life, all zip codes, all colors, races, and creeds. So UMB, I'm happy to be here. We are not novices to this. We are not novices to our commitment to our core values of equity and justice, to our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'll share with you some things that we've been doing as a campus, things we've done across our leadership, questions we've asked some of you to help us answer in the registrar's office, all the deans of all the schools, the various leaders in areas. So one of the first things we did in anticipation of the decision, I think we started our first sets of formal conversations this spring, January, February. And if you hear your name called out, it's you, Provost Warren. Chief Diversity Officer, we met, Law School Dean, Dean Hutchins, and General Counsel Anita Karyakakis. And we had some initial talks about what does this mean? What happens when this is about to start? And this conversation is an outgrowth of that. We need to educate and engage people in what this means, because all the great things Mark is talking about, 90% of us don't know all the technicalities of the decision. What does this mean for our lives? So planning programs such as this. But what we needed to do is talk with all our school colleagues about what are you doing in your areas in terms of your admissions practices. So let me share with you some of the things we asked so that we could educate ourselves and then prepare and strategize for the future. Just a few of the 10 questions, not all of them. Does your practice in your university, your part of the university, your school, your unit involve or employ any affirmative action or racial preference measures? Please explain. And as academicians, you all did. So we learned school by school, especially in School of Medicine, there were at least 10 different programs in the MPH program and others, School of Nursing, many others, School of Law. Everyone provided a very detailed and specific and evidence-based response that helped us to go, there might be a loophole here where we might be breaking the law. In case this happens, here's what we might advise. We just had a meeting yesterday to discuss some of that. Things such as, to what extent does your practice, your admissions practice, consider what we call non-cognitive factors, as well as contextual, experiential, and academic criteria in admissions? Non-cognitive factors are some of the things Mark explained. Life experiences, community service and experience, leadership, engagement. Have you worked in a clinic before? Have you taught before? What are the ways in which you've served your community? My daughter, who ended up going to Howard, she's a junior in psychology and neuroscience, we were talking. I said, remember when you co-founded that women's group for so-and-so? Do you remember when you did this? I said, that is leadership and community service, Maya. Include that also. So yes, you have the high GPA and Loyola is offering you these scholarships and this one is writing to you. And you have these leadership things as well. So in a holistic admissions process, we consider, although Howard was always her number one choice, when Loyola came along, and Patricia and I talked about this, and said, you can earn an MSW and an undergrad psychology degree at Loyola in Chicago, and we will fund it, and you can earn this in 5 years. She leaned over, she said, wow. And I said, oh, what about that other school that you said you wanted to go to? But because of that opportunity, she began thinking about Loyola, dual degree, 5 years with her ability and everything. And I thought, oh, these are important things that can shape the admissions decision. Not once did she say, and I'm also African-American. So the non-cognitive factors related to experience and so on, we wanted our schools here at UMB to discuss and help us with. Things such as pipeline programs. Do we have specific partnership programs with specific racial, ethnic, or other partner programs to build that pipeline to UMB, and or that we fund or provide advantages to? We need to know these things. Is there a specific Hispanic or Indigenous or Black scholarship in the school of for so-and-so? Or do you say minoritized populations or diversity? Wherever those things are happening, we have conducted an initial review of our practices across all schools at UMB to begin to highlight what's explicit/blatant that says race or minority in these ways. What's kind of in the middle? We support diversity. And what's just all who want to come here can attend. And we have all gradations of responses. And what we're working with from there now is to then begin to engage us and you on, here are the kinds of changes we need to make. Another thing, what's happening on our websites? You know, there are folks who are looking at our websites going, there's a loophole. Here's a way that they are breaking the law or not doing the right thing. So we want to work with our various offices in communication and tech to help us with that review to talk that through. And just briefly, and then I'll turn it back to Mark. We know that this is new for some. We expected it, but we were in a retreat earlier, but we have a little bit of a gut punch. Those of us who care about this work and are thinking about access and opportunity for those populations that have been most marginalized, particularly in the United States. and the history of race, racial arrangement, racial hierarchies that have excluded many, including women. And I speak also both personally and professionally. 5 years at Howard University, 10 years at Trinity University, a women's college, and HBCU for 15 years of my almost 30-year career. I know what those universities mean and those opportunities mean for building pipelines to professional and graduate schools such as UMB and all the great places where you and I have worked over the years. So this is important for us to think about strategically and to think, how can we continue? This is not new for us. How can we continue at UMB to live out our core principles of equity and justice? And on behalf of the university and the president and all of us, our longstanding unwavering commitment to equity remains strong, kind of like the State of the Union is strong. It remains strong at UMB, and we are going to work together through training, development, and engagement to live that out and to be leaders in the field. Thank you.
Mark, any other comments?
Other than a request from you, actually, namely for more money from the law school, because if we read, to go back, when the court says we're doing this to clarify, remember, for those who remember, Dobbs said, thank God there won't be any more litigation over abortion once we simply return it to the states. Well, the good news for lawyers is none of us are out of jobs. And the good news for this opinion for lawyers is you're going to need an awful lot of lawyers, because it used to be there was only one thing, how much race? Now all over the lot, anyone who gets rejected is going to sue. So I would recommend we double our class, triple the law professor salaries, and
Anybody else, other requests?
while I have you here, I figure,
They never miss a chance. I think maybe before I open it to questions, I would just want to take the position on behalf of UMB that, first of all, we will follow the law. The law will have to be interpreted for us, and we'll figure out how to do that. And second of all, we won't change our core principles. We're committed to equity and inclusion on this campus, and we'll continue to be committed to it. We have to continue the things we've been doing, and there may be lots of other ways that we can continue to become a more diverse campus. And of course, this is a very diverse state too, and we have a lot to be proud of there as well. So with that, I will stop and ask for questions. Alex, none from the internet audience. So how about from the real live audience here? Questions? Yes, I see one.
Just a comment to say that I think I'm really impressed with the pipeline programs that we have, that I've seen, like our Bridges to the Doctorate, and I know like School of Social Work, in other words, other schools have some great pipeline. Do we anticipate an increase in that? It's an effective program, and is there data showing that the success of that nationally? And Diane, you may have some knowledge on it.
I will speak in general on the success of partnership and pipeline programs, and I will leave it to Dr. Jarrell and our deans, and in my role to work with donors and philanthropists to build that pipeline as well. Shall we start with Cure Scholars? For my coming here, that was attractive to me. It's a small and mighty group. I think there's an opportunity there for continued community engagement, donor relation building, so that we can say from, I think it starts from 6th grade, right, middle school all the way through, which is when we know we lose students in the STEM pipeline. Both my children were in types of programs, and I also taught in programs where from age 9 or 10 on, they were in single-sex STEM programs, math, lab, and so forth. And I've seen the results with a robotics whiz at 17 years old, building computers at 10, and coding from 8 years old with Google interns, right? So we know that when we have those programs for students who otherwise either wouldn't have that opportunity and or have the funding, the exposure, Dr. Mae Jameson talks about exposure, experience, and expectation. That's how we increase the pipeline, and particularly for minoritized students to be a part of the STEM pipeline and participation and leadership. Let's not leave it just there. So certainly there are opportunities for that. My own experience as a graduate student at Howard, I was fully funded. Orlando Taylor was our dean, and put that type of funding into a number of us now who are deans, vice presidents, presidents, VPs at UNICEF, and all these great things at the World Bank and in the United States. So we know it matters. And so are there opportunities to expand that? The answer is yes. By zip code, by geography, by population, ethnic, racial groups. and where there are schools that are under-resourced, particularly in some of the areas that we have featured at UMB.
So I know, in fact, that our Dean of Law was very focused on pipeline programs around the state. Diane mentioned the Cure Scholars. That program is alive and well, and in fact, you'll see an announcement soon where we got a $700,000 gift to provide scholarships for those young men and women so that when they finish the 12th grade, the objective is to get them a full scholarship to college. And the last group of graduates, we had 19 go on to higher education once they graduated. And so I think getting scholarships is another way to do that. And this is particularly for the Cure Scholars. I think every school has significant pipeline programs. And so we will remain committed to that. Can we amp it up as quickly as we can get support to do it is the answer.
Bruce, I'd like to add as well, the rich opportunity and partnerships we can create and build with historically Black colleges and institutions. We have 4 in the USM and a number in the DMV, so to speak, the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. How are we continuing to build that, expand that, invite? We are now in a newer competitive market where they have more choices now. With this decision, some will choose that first without even considering us. How are we being a part of that discourse of inclusion, as well as access to say, you are welcome here, and here are the things in our curriculum. I know Georgetown had created 8 public health and public equity health tracks, which increased their enrollment of minoritized students at Georgetown Medical School. And we have done some similar things in our MPH program in School of Medicine and other parts of our university. And that the issues, the research areas, the clinical areas attract those populations as well and create a more enriching and diverse environment.
And I know that the deans of law and medicine have been there, and I suspect nursing and dentistry have done the same. So there has continued to be an emphasis on pipeline programs. I saw another question somewhere. Greg. Sure.
Well, as a leader of several of these pipeline programs, and we have actually students from one of our pipeline programs here, Star Prep. So someone said Cure, someone said Bridge to Doctorate. But it just so happens that I have a table here of, I think, 17 different programs at UMB. So I'm just working on a separate project. There's a staircase of programs that goes all the way from 4th grade and now all the way up to faculty. And these are robustly funded by philanthropists, by the NIH. And what I want to say is that it's one of the reasons the students come here. Dr. Berthoud just said this is one of the reasons she chose to come here as a leader. So going back to what the professor of law said, can institutions make a case that it's in our compelling interest, it's in our interest that these programs attract, sustain, nurture, grow diversity populations, and can things like campus surveys or surveying the faculty, staff, students, our medical students are coming here because of these programs. Our graduate students are coming here because of the programs. The faculty are coming here because of the programs. The money is coming here because of the programs. Can you make cases that it is because of these diverse focused programs that our university is thriving, and therefore we need more like it, instead of trying to figure out how to stop them?
So Professor Carey deserves great recognition because he has been a champion for these programs for a long time. And the programs vary from many age groups, including young men and women who get through college but want to have a research career. Greg, just tell us your 25 number. The Star Prep, how many of them going on to graduate programs? Yeah.
She's integrally involved in all of the programs from Cure up, and we will also Cure scholars at some point in time. I was, as a postdoctoral fellow myself, as a graduate student, Dr. Jones, and then Cure started growing into other classes. For Star Prep itself, I sleep with the statistics under my pillow. We've had 41 students who've come.
I know it.
So he asked the question, I'm going to give you the answer. We have 41 students who've come through the program here at UMB in the past 7 years of the program. And it just in short, the program has about a 90% ascension rate to terminal degrees, PhD, MD, PhD, MD, MD, dual degree, 100% retention. And to the university system's credit, whereas sometimes students would want to go to other schools like Dr. Berthoud's child, 1/3 of those students are doing their PhDs in the University System of Maryland. So the fact that UMB can attract 1/3 of these talented scholars who are being hounded by those other schools, they are turning those other schools down, and 1/3 of them have chosen to stay here, get their PhDs and terminal degrees. That says a lot.
So pipelines are at many levels, I think is maybe one of the points. Alex?
Well, we do have a number of people online. Amy Ramirez, I want to bring her in. She has a question about sort of a wider scope of impact of the decision. Amy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. My question is, many of our pipeline programs are funded by federal agencies. And does this decision mean that the federal agencies will be constrained from offering grants to universities for these purposes?
Question, Professor Graber.
I don't know the details of the pipeline programs. If the pipeline programs make explicit use of race, say you can only be an African American, be in the program, then federal agencies will not be able to support them. If the program says, no, we take people from these schools in Baltimore, say that are historically underperforming. We take people from these zip codes. We take kids whose parents do not have a college degree or various things like that. Then there's, as far as I read this decision, there's no problem. The crucial thing is the use of race direct, or rather are there proxies that may capture race, but also capture a great many other things?
Thank you.
The law is so easy, I find. Yes. I had a question right
That's
here.
why you need to fund.
I actually have two different questions. The
Yes.
first question is, I'm wondering how this decision will affect undergraduate admissions versus graduate admissions, like if there will be any difference in that. And I was wondering what the, I guess like downstream effects will be for admission for other minoritized populations, like besides racial and ethnic identity, like what other identities might come under fire with this decision.
Okay. Professor Graber again?
Okay. The simple answer is it affects everybody from kindergarten to postdoc. The more complex, which I am 100% confident the court has not thought through, is strict scrutiny is largely reserved for race, religion. There is a lesser degree of scrutiny for gender. So it's entirely possible you could still use gender directly for, say, programs that women have historically not been involved in. They use minimal scrutiny for sexual orientation and expression. So it is highly probable, if we wanted to have a program, say that we decided that it turns out there's been historic disadvantage for gays and lesbians in the dentistry program, it looks like under the present doctrine of the Supreme Court, you could directly say, we are giving bonuses to people of non-heterosexual sexual orientation. At least that's how I read the decisions.
How do you read this outside of admissions to educational programs? So recruitment of minority faculty, staff, the like. Does this have any application to those groups?
I think so, on the ground that diversity was the great exception as far as this court was concerned. Namely, you could typically only use race to remedy your own racial injustice or in a real emergency, as in winning World War II. Diversity was this weird exception. So my sense is, having gotten rid of this, what the court sort of thought was a weird exception, unless you are remedying, if you can show, for example, that the reason why we have fewer African-American faculty in the banana department is because of past discrimination. Now we're allowed to use a race remedy. But if we can't show we are remedying our wrong, we cannot use race. So for example, I take it there's very little dispute that there's been a lot of race prejudice in Alabama. We can't say as Maryland, we're going to give an African-American student applying to the medical school from Alabama a plus because Alabama engaged in race discrimination. Possibly we can do it if we can show that the state of Maryland engaged in race discrimination.
Or study on that one, I am sure, because that's going to be complicated. How about other questions? Clara, was that your arm? What's your question, Clara?
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but these proxies that you refer to, won't they eventually start to sound like stereotypes?
Yes, they could. And our dear registrar, our expert registrar who talked with us about this helped us to understand more about a holistic admissions process. So race, although it's, from my perspective, separated from all other aspects of identity as interpreted and spoken to here in the law, it is intersectional with class. It is intersectional with ability, with region, with geographic location, with language. And so all of those elements make up aspects of your experience that tell us at UMB and in higher education, which is part of how we are angling here. Are you willing and able to work with diverse populations that we serve, thank you, General Counsel, in the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland? Who do we serve in Baltimore? Let's look at our statistics. Let's look at both class, racial dynamics and demographics. Let's look also at circumstance. Let's look at environmental conditions, pollution, cardiac disease, health outcomes. And when we look at those elements, they intersect with race, although we may or may not state it as, I'm a Black person who lives by the railroad tracks, who earns this, single income household, has been unemployed 4 times this year or whatever, which may or may not be the case for all African Americans, right? So there are intersectional components that when we think about circumstance, we are able to see, are you able to work in a clinical, teaching, research, learning environment in Baltimore and ready to serve the public good in the state of Maryland, which is different from where I lived in California before, in DC before that, and Virginia before that, and so forth. So there are elements, Claire, great question, where without speaking to race explicitly, which again, for some of us is a blow because that is a key component of some of our identities, we are able to speak to other elements of our experience that we bring to the educational and clinical environment.
Thank you. Courtney?
So related to proxies, we know from there, and you talked about in the face-to-face that other states have already, some other states have already gone through this at the state level with affirmative action. And we've seen drops in numbers of either applicants or acceptance rates for minority students. I saw a quote earlier today from the president at University of Michigan and the provost, along the same lines. So is it that proxies don't work, or what, and I'm sort of wondering, like, we're talking about proxies as a way to get around this, but do they work? And, what's the answer there? I know there's not an answer. I shouldn't ask for an answer, but what are your thoughts?
From my experience in California for 11 years, it presented a tremendous challenge and an additional barrier to our work. It didn't make it impossible. Berkeley experienced a drop by half in Black population. Right now, the Latinx population in California is close to 40%. UCs are struggling to get to 20% in the various universities. My previous campus at San Diego was considered an emerging HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. Some are already at the 25%. I think it's Merced and some others that are there in San Francisco as well. And we have still not met the Black population mirror of the 5% in California on our campuses. We were close to 3% when I had left, coming from 1.3, by the way. So that was doubling, although it's still single digit. So there are tremendous barriers. So we had to get creative. Pipeline programs, MOUs with tribal colleges, working with the reservations, working with the various transfer and community colleges, as well as various districts that are underserved, and areas that focused on pollution, COVID and health disparities, to not only attract faculty and grants and funding, but also to create vibrancy in our learning and curriculum. So I want to say California has not recovered. I was pleased to work in that system for a decade, and Michigan is doing a fine job in some areas, but we are still struggling as a nation.
Other questions? Yes, Alex.
Obviously, the discussion of pipeline programs really resonated with the audience. We have a number of questioners out there. Let's bring in Mary Rogers. There?
Hi there. My question was just, how can we as faculty members best support the pipeline programs?
Well, part of it is we need to maybe get a better job of making the pipeline programs known. So we could work on that. I will tell you though, there's a lot of pipeline programs that depend upon volunteers. The School of Pharmacy has a large tutoring program. There's a tutoring program over in the Community Engagement Center. Other schools undoubtedly have tutoring programs. Those can be students, faculty, or staff. But I think having faculty involved is important because it shows a certain commitment on behalf of the institution. So I would encourage that. But maybe, Greg, we need to work on something like that. Landetta, maybe that's an objective for us to do here.
Make them better known.
Yeah. And of course, Cure Scholars, what's the ratio? 1 student per 4 or 5 mentors? It's a pretty high number, isn't it? 5 to 1. Takes a lot of people to do that. Other questions? Yes, Landetta, Professor Jones.
Yes, thank you all so much for having this conversation. In fact, as we mentioned, I'm joined here with at least 3 of our 5 Star Prep scholars in the pipeline programs. And we were actually having a conversation the other day about applying to schools down the road. So they spend a year with us and then they apply for either a PhD or MD PhD programs. And we found on the website prior to this decision a map of the states that have certain affirmative action laws already in place. And one of the things we were considering as they're juggling schools and where to apply was for one of the schools that's highlighted, should you actually apply there? So, and now with this federal decision, I guess we're grateful hearing this because everything is a little fuzzy, but this is their future and wherever their forever home will be for the PhD. As we know, for those with their PhD, it's not just 5 years, it's even, well, it's a long time. So we want to make sure they're in a safe space. So any advice for, the states and this law in terms of where to apply that they would find the environment friendly, I guess, if that makes sense.
So maybe I could ask Professor Graber a question, because in the Dobbs case, what that did was pushed a federal decision down to states for decisions. That sound, am I close enough?
Yeah.
I'm a surgeon, remember? Okay. This case doesn't push anything down to the states to allow states a certain flexibility in this. Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah, in one sense, obviously, in some sense, it takes a state question and makes it a federal question. Namely, before states got to decide to some degree, now the latitude is less. But one of the things we know, and I'm going to start with an incredibly offensive person, but if we can recall just how difficult it was for the Supreme Court to desegregate schools in the face of Southern intransience. It turns out one of the lessons is that Supreme Court decisions often do not translate on the ground to what you think they mean. So one of the things we will discover is Ron DeSantis is going to get up and say, you see, my anti-woke crusade has gone national. And the administrators he has appointed in Florida are going to have a no use, don't even think race. We discover someone was even thinking race, we throw out the result. There are going to be university leaders, hypothetical, I won't mention anyone by name. Thank you. Who aren't very fond of this decision, who will be looking to what we might call the minimal interpretation of this decision. Now, I think the experience of some other states indicate the minimal interpretation still has costs for those goals. But the crucial feature is, I mean, my daughter teaches at the University of Georgia. Georgia's a lousy political state from my perspective. But the faculty on the University of Georgia is in fact quite progressive. So if you can stomach being in Georgia, you will probably be in a very safe environment in Georgia. So I wouldn't really worry about what the governor of the state is saying. I'd worry more about what the president of the university is saying. Yeah, more so. Yeah, the governor matters, but it turns out on the ground, the president of the university, the department heads, your mentor, sets your tone far more than 9 justices who go on vacations with their billionaire friends.
You all remember that disclaimer that you see, that I don't speak on behalf of the federal government, I speak for myself. That's what he's doing.
I'll
But
add to
I
that
think
as well.
As I said earlier, and I think Diane will reiterate, we're here to follow the law and we're here to stick to our core principles. And that will be our intention, and that will be my intention.
Sure, and I'll add to Professor Graber's remarks. Pay attention as well to the tea leaves around DEI. There is a DEI legislative tracker in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Just Google it. Chronicle DEI legislation. You can see what's happening by state, but really importantly by university, and what is happening in terms of strategy, structure, and funding and discourse around diversity, equity, inclusion, access, belonging, psychological safety. Look at leadership teams, absolutely what Professor Graber said. Faculty, you will work closely with your mentors and advisors. They can chart your path in ways known and unknown to you at this point. And I'm speaking 28 years almost out of Howard now as a graduate student and as a postdoc fellow. And had it not been for some of those key mentors there, and then going to George Mason and some other places that helped in that way. But of course, DC, Virginia, right? It's a different type of politics, curriculum, foci at the various institutions where I've been over the years. So state dynamics, yes. Federal dynamics, certainly, and your department in your area. What does your university believe? Where is the funding going? And what are the ways in which your research area, your identities, your locations are highlighted and centralized in the research that you're interested in and are teaching and our clinical experience? It's all interconnected. It's not separated. The academic experience is not separated from your personal, psychological, clinical, or other interests. So I would say that as well. So read those tea leaves, watch the news, and see where those states are going. I've heard this from med, pre-med, and practicing physicians who've said, we're going to be leaving Texas. we're not going to want to teach in Florida anymore because of this, or I want to practice this. I'm not going to learn that in this area. Is there anything in Maryland? It's like, come on up here, we're ready for you. Come on. You know, so they're looking at these things and making these decisions as well, particularly as I've heard in medicine.
Other questions? Yes. Wait 1 second.
We need them.
Hi, I was wondering, this is a semi-formed question or maybe 2 questions, but what are the direct consequences of institutions that break this new ruling? And are there any consequences for institutions that do not provide space or support for non-homogeneous populations? I recently came from a leadership conference and I was speaking with another student who goes to a school out west, not California, but they said that their school had this year in particular really pushed for diversity in their class. But when speaking with the students, everyone seemed to still come from a very similar background or region or school of thought. So there wasn't this collection of diverse ideas. It was more of a surface level, I guess, process that they made. But I was wondering if schools can kind of get around like creating more of a community that is representative and able to tackle the different problems that many different communities have, then are they not kind of held to any standards to bring in people who are better able to serve, I guess, neighborhoods or populations that don't necessarily all hold the exact same ideas as people already at the institutions?
Legal consequences.
Okay, well, here I'm going to speak a little bit with a couple of my other hats. Namely, in addition to a lawyer, I picked up a PhD in political science, and actually what I write on is legal history. Some people just never made up their mind what they're going to do with their lives. In one sense, the legal consequences may be less than you could think of, because if we do something that someone thinks is illegal, they have to sue us. That's a 5-year project. One of the important things will be, what is the commitment to your understanding of what you want to do to maintain certain programs in the face of this decision that you believe, as I suspect I will believe, are consistent with this decision understood as law. Because there are a lot of very well-funded organizations that will bring lawsuits. And the way a great many lawsuits succeed is they don't succeed because you win, but they succeed because the underfunded university just simply says, you know, it's a lot easier just to say, okay, we're going to abandon this program because we don't want to pay for the litigation. If universities are willing to pay for the litigation, most of that litigation will be handled in the lower federal courts. And the lower federal courts for the past 2 years have had an influx of quite diverse progressive judges. And for the next 2 years, that'll be the same thing, that are likely to look favorably. But it will require a commitment to the cost of litigation.
There are also organizational consequences. Last night, I was on a panel with Dr. K, UMBC president, leaders from the United Way and other leaders in Baltimore. And one of the things we talked about is how can we all win? And one of the things we concluded is we are not winning in the United States in so many areas. We are, but we are not in other areas because there's not an inclusive economy. There's not an inclusive curriculum. There's not an inclusive environment. There is racial injustice, economic injustice, and so many layers, right? We don't have all the best brains in the room, the most diverse voices, perspectives, as you just talked about. So institutions have been surface about the diversity discourse without being authentic, and accountable for what we do. So we're not there. I think UMB is winning. I look across this room. I know almost all our leaders across campus, and I'm meeting more every day, and community members and others. And we are committed to having all those voices and perspectives in the room. We continue to work. We're not perfect people. When you look at the US's ranking in literacy, in STEM, in biomedical research and other areas, we are sometimes 25th, 30th, 40th, and things like that. Now, by state, you can see progress in certain areas, but as a country, have we really worked to repair and correct some of the injustices and the hierarchies created through history? To then say, we have to change that narrative. We are working on it really hard at UMB and in other institutions. But there are institutions that will continue to do a surface job and not be as authentic and accountable. I believe that we are, and I'm glad that so many of us show that interest, and having a formal leader doing that. We don't leave our finances up to whatever and our real estate up to whatever. Why would we leave our equity and access decisions and leadership hanging? We need a strategy and structure around it to say that we're serious about it, and we are.
Another question.
Try to ask a second question, but it's related to the issue of proxies and intersectionality. And that seems to me like it might be and is currently a valuable tool in terms of us overcoming today's decision. And I wondered if you could both maybe talk about that, and maybe Dr. Jarrell too, like what our plans are to use to continue building our pipelines, and maybe think about this intersectionality and how we reach out to individuals for recruitment, students, faculty, whatever the case may be.
So briefly, because I know there are other questions coming in, I think what we have is a good thing, and we can continue where possible to expand those. All these pipeline programs that Dr. Carey, Dr. Jones, and others have mentioned, and new ones that can be created and funded. Yes to all of those things. And some of the strategies we used in both Michigan and California that I spoke to last week, and for this new audience today, focusing on under-resourced areas, geographic districts, diversity along literacy, exposure and experience in STEM and some of these other areas. We have to look at all of those aspects of an undergraduate to graduate student experience, as well as K through 12 to college experience, to fully understand who a student is. Their race is an important element. Now that the law has been passed that says this, we also know there are other critical aspects that inform their educational experience.
There may be a funny upside today, and it goes with a little bad New York Times reporting. If you look at the Times, I think either today or yesterday, you'll see polls on affirmative action. And it turns out if you ask people, should you use race? You've seen it's unpopular. But if you ask people, should diversity be an important goal? It's popular. So one of the effects may be to make a lot of programs with some adjustment a lot more popular in the voting public than they have been. So this is if the pipeline programs can be done correctly, this is a potential upside for attempts to promote DI that may make it politically more popular.
Alex, other questions?
Well, I was going to bring in Aaron Dutta, but he's not able to turn his mic on. But he has a question again about the broader impacts of this. And that is this going to apply to other areas like scholarship eligibility? And others have asked, will this affect training grants from NIH, things like that?
Yes. No, I really emphasize that it wasn't the case that diversity programs were across the board. The court had largely limited diversity to university and said everybody else, the standard is even stricter than that. So there's a case called Croson dealing with contractors in Richmond, Virginia, where they basically said, nope, can't use race. So we can assume, unless you can demonstrate you are remedying your past race discrimination, the use of race directly will not be allowed.
We're about out of time. Any parting comments or questions? So this was, we timed this, I guess, tight, didn't we? Because we didn't get to read it long, and I'm sure we'll have some more to discuss about this in the future. So maybe we'll stop here. I just want to thank all of you for coming. A great discussion, great questions. I want to thank our two panelists for coming. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Q&A session. So thank you.
All right, by the way, for those interested, I have a constitutional law casebook in which I have to excerpt every case, and obviously this is important. I should be done whittling 250 pages down to about 15 or 20 tonight. If I'll send it to Alex, if anyone wants a readable 15-page version, just email me or email Alex and we'll have that.
And it is readable. I've read thesis before and I've listened to his other sessions before. Thank you very much, Professor Graber. Thank you, Dr. Forbes Berthoud.
Thank you.
Thank you.